Hello, and welcome to the lecture, Elements of Art and Principles of Design, the building blocks for understanding art. You can use the information in this lecture to help you analyze not only a piece of art, but also commercials, print ads, music videos, title sequences, etc. We'll start with the two-dimensional elements of art. The first and most basic is line. Line is the most fundamental tool of artists. What is a line? Well, if you'll remember from geometry class, it is something that divides planes in space from each other. Lines can be straight or curved. They can be regular or irregular. You see here in the graphic on the left a piece of art done by ancient people out of dirt. It includes both curved and irregular lines. Lines can be actual or they can be implied. In other words, hinted at. So I could take two objects in a painting, and if they line up with each other, they could imply a line. Lines can direct our eyes in a particular way as we view artwork. Lines can also suggest feeling and communicate. For example, look at this building on the top right. It has vertical lines. Vertical lines denote strength, authority, and stability. Horizontal lines, like the ones you see on the sailboat on the ocean in the middle picture, denote calm, peace, and passiveness. So you see how the artist of this little sketch of the sailboat has made it seem peaceful by making the waves horizontal, the lines on the sails horizontal, and the lines on the bottom of the boat horizontal as well. Diagonal lines, like the Nike swoosh pictured on the bottom right, denote movement, action, and drama. So this is the perfect kind of line for an athletic shoe. Let's look at this painting by Vincent van Gogh, done in 1889, called The Bedroom. Usually when we think of bedrooms, we think of places of peace and relaxation where you can get away from all the stresses of the day. But this room is anything but peaceful. And what creates this feeling of unease that we see when looking at this painting? It's the lines. So I'll pause a moment and let you look and see where the lines are going and what kind of lines are included. The next element of art I'd like to talk about is shape. This is often what viewers notice first when they are looking at a piece of art, like this rug on the left. There are several different kinds of shapes that you may see in art. One is a geometric shape. Geometric shapes have regular lines and curves. They are mathematical. So think back to geometry class again, where you learn the definition of a line. Think of all the shapes that you worked with in geometry, triangles, squares, trapezoids, etc. But we can also have what's called organic shapes. Organic shapes may seem unrestrained and chaotic. They are still two-dimensional, like the geometric shapes. You can see that this rug includes both geometric and organic shapes. This collage on paper called Baby Blocks by Miriam Shapiro also includes both geometric shapes and organic shapes. You can see the geometric shapes in the background with this kind of tessellation of cubes, but we also have organic shapes that look like they're cut from pieces of wallpaper with the flowers and also the baby dresses. Another element of art that is important to note is contrast. Contrast is two noticeably different states of an element. Art employs both positive and negative space. Positive space is the main focus of a piece of art. So in this musical poster for Frozen, the positive space would be the snowflake. It's the main focus of the piece of art. The negative space is the background or the space that surrounds an image. Sometimes it's just there for contrast purposes, but other times there can be meaning in the background, in the negative space. I'll pause a moment to see if you can find the several hidden negative space images in this poster. Here are some more examples of contrast in graphic design and art. You have the famous Obey poster by Shepard Fairey from 1996 that has the head of Andre the Giant. We have the Big Ten conference logo from 1991 by Al Gravetti. See if you can find the hidden message in the negative space in the Big Ten logo. And then finally, a painting by a very famous American painter, Georgia O'Keeffe, Music, Pink and Blue 2 from 1919. And you see the contrast here between the blues and the pinks. Let's move on to the three-dimensional elements of art. First that I'd like to talk about is form. Form is a three-dimensional object. It has volume, or the amount of space occupied by an object, and mass, the suggestion that the object is solid. We can have geometric forms just like we had geometric shapes. They can be regular. These regular geometric forms can be expressed in words or numbers, like a cube or a prism. And you can find the volume of them with a mathematical formula. But there are also organic forms. Organic forms are irregular and unpredictable. They may change in response to a surrounding. For example, they may expand or contract. They may be subject to erosion. Form can also be relief work, as you see here. This is when the form is projecting from a flat surface, both 2- and 3-dimensional. Or form can be in the round, like the statue head that you saw on the previous slide. The work could be viewed from all sides. Here is a 3-dimensional form called Batman from 1998 by the sculptor Lino Tagliapietra. I'll pause a minute and let you look at it. Why do you think that Tagliapietra called this work Batman? I think it's a combination of the Batman logo kind of distorted with Joker's smile, but that's just my interpretation. Another 3-dimensional element of art is texture, as we see in this knotted wall hanging on the left. Texture is a tactile sensation experienced when we physically encounter a 3D form. But you can also have subversive texture, like we see in the close-up from Salvador Dali's Persistence of Memory below. Subversive texture contradicts our own tactile experience. In this case, we see a pocket watch, which if we touched it would be smooth and cold, melting and seeming to disintegrate. Surrealist artists in particular love to use subversive texture. Here's an architectural piece. It's the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. The architect is Frank Gehry. Do you see how the architect used texture in his building? Not only do we have the contrast of metal and glass, but we also have interesting bumpy shapes. And if you look closely, you can see that the metal walls have scales like a fish. Another element of art is value. Value means lightness and darkness. There are two ways to create value in art. One is chiaroscuro, which literally means light-dark in Italian. This is applying value to a 2-dimensional piece to create the illusion of 3 dimensions. We can also create value by something called hatching. Hatching is another way to express value. It is a series of lines close to and parallel to each other. Or if I have cross-hatching, I have overlapping lines to show value. I'm going to show you this piece here that uses hatching to create value. This is Prehenstility by Olivia Knapp. You can see the cross-hatching especially prominent in the hands. Another really prominent element of art is color. It is the most vivid element of art and design. There is a psychological element to the interpretation of color that I'll get into more in a moment. But first I want to talk about the basic properties of color: hue, value, and saturation. Let's talk about hue first. Hue is what we really mean when most of us say the word color. Hue means the basic colors of the spectrum. You have the primary colors of red, blue, and yellow, which cannot be mixed from the other colors. And then you have the secondary colors, orange, purple, green, that can be made from primary colors. Value in terms of color refers to the relative lightness or darkness compared to other hues. Tints are lighter than the basic hue, and shades are darker than their basic hue. Some artists use a monochromatic color scheme, as you see here with this tiger. Sorry, my kitten jumped across the keyboard and is trying to turn on subtitles, but we'll just carry on. I'm not sure if you can see this or not. The work is only one hue in a monochromatic work, and the artist uses value to show differences. So we have this picture of a tiger, which is very appropriate because my kitten just jumped across the keyboard. And he is not in orange and black and white, as you would normally see a tiger, but in different shades of blue, shades and tints of blue, with the tints being lighter and the shades being darker. Saturation is a color at its most intense. A color at its most intense has the highest level of saturation. We refer to color like the base level color as the purity of the hue as derived from pure white light. Muted colors have less saturation. Here's a graphic to help you understand the difference between hue, value, and separation. You see hue going around in a circular fashion the color wheel to show you the different colors. Saturation starts in the middle with very washed out versions of the color and moves towards the edges, getting more and more saturated. And then value starts with the darker values of the hues at the bottom and the lighter values at the top. There's also color schemes that artists use to communicate with us. There are complementary colors. Note the spelling there with the E in the middle. These contrast sharply with each other. Complementary colors can create optical illusions. You can kind of see if you stare long enough at this graphic on the left, the colors kind of jiggle and jump out at you. That's because they're complementary. Analogous colors are similar in wavelength if you're talking about physics, and they do not create optical illusions. Let's look at these two pictures here. The one on the top left is using complementary colors. See how orange and purple and yellow are all kind of juxtaposed against each other to create this really startling painting? At the bottom, we have analogous colors, which are more or less on the same wavelength. So even though we have this sense of motion with the sail that is full of air and the man with the oars rowing, we still have a sense of peacefulness, and this does not hurt our eyes the way that the top picture might. Let's talk some more about color and the brain. Colors can affect our thoughts and feelings. For example, how does red affect us? Is it a color of anger or a color of confidence? Or, in some cultures, a color of good luck? How about blue? When you say, "I feel blue," you're saying that you're sad. Advertisers use color to draw attention to their products. For example, lime yellow is the most visible color because of where it lies on the color spectrum, and so is used a lot to highlight things in advertising. There's also a symbolic value of color, and some of this is culturally dependent. For example, yellow and gold are associated with Buddha and Confucius in Asian cultures. In Western cultures, blue in Christian and Jewish art is associated with God. Here's a beautiful computer image art piece called Wondrous Spring that uses color in a really fabulous way. Let's talk now about principles of design. First is unity and variety. These are opposites, but we want to have both in a piece of art if we're designing it. Unity is to create order or wholeness. It refers to harmony in design, but too much unity can create a boring design. On the opposite end is variety, which is visual diversity. How do different elements, ideas, and media come together in one artwork? But too much variety will result in the lack of a central idea. So look at this relief work here depicting a Hindu god reclining with various people around him. We have this figure of the god standing out and creating variety. We also have variety in the different poses of the people down below and above, but these characters also express unity because of their hairstyles and how they are dressed. Here's an assemblage called the Hotel Eden from 1945 by Joseph Cornell. Consider the elements that are unified and show unity and those that show variety in this work. Another principle of design is balance. This is the idea that parts of a work should have balanced weight in order to achieve equilibrium. The first type of balance is symmetrical balance, where each side looks exactly the same or nearly exactly the same. So if you ignore the graphic on this vase from ancient Greece and instead draw an imaginary line from the very top of the vase to the very bottom, bisecting it in two, you would see that each side is the mirror image of each other, and so this piece is symmetrical. By contrast, asymmetrical balance means that there are visually heavy objects in one part of the art that must be balanced by several lighter objects in another part of the artwork. Here's a very famous painting, beloved by many, Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. You see how there's a very large tree in the bottom left, going up to the top left, and how Van Gogh has balanced this out with the orbs on the right top end with asymmetrical balance. Scale and proportion is another principle of design. Scale is perceived in terms of our own perspective. So there's monumental scale, which would be the object is larger than it would appear in real life. There's human scale, which means the object appears as it naturally exists. And then there's small scale, meaning the object appears smaller than naturally exists. The scale is used to indicate importance. So you see this medieval stained glass piece here, and we have some smaller figures around the edges with a very large figure and a pretty large figure in the middle. Well, in the middle, that is the Virgin Mary and the Christ child. And because this is a religious work, those are the most important characters. So they are bigger to indicate their importance. On the sides of the piece of artwork are lesser figures, saints and prophets, and so they are given a smaller scale. Here's a very famous piece called The School of Athens by the Renaissance painter Raphael. You can see how it has humans in very human scale, but in a monumental environment. Dominance and subordination is another element of art. This refers to what does an artist emphasize and what does she de-emphasize. The emphasis can be achieved through color, texture, light, any way to indicate that something is different. Abstract artists, like the one who created this painting, rely heavily on dominance and subordination. Sometimes, however, works do not have an emphasis. Let's look at this piece by Peter Paul Rubens called Daniel in the Lion's Den. Dominance and subordination. We definitely see the figure of Daniel very dominant. Why is that? Well, part of it is because he's the only one that's not a lion in this painting, but also you see how he is lit differently than the lions, that light seems to be streaming down on him, and he is emphasized with this red cloak that he is seated on. Directional forces. These can also be called focal point. For example, in this painting to the left, where is the artist drawing our eye? You see how people seem to be pointing at those canals? Directional forces can be achieved through lines and contrast, but it just indicates when an artist is trying to direct our eye in a certain way. Now, here's a very short trigger warning. The next painting I'm going to show you is pretty violent. So there you are, you've been forewarned. This is called Judith Decapitating Holofernes by Artemisia Gentileschi from 1620. And you can see the directional forces created by Judith's arms and the arms of her maidservant there as they are decapitating Holofernes. Now, Artemisia is a very well-known, or becoming more and more well-known, artist from this time period, and she loves to depict the Judith and Holofernes scene. She has some personal background story that makes her want to do that, which you can look into if you're interested. Repetition and rhythm. This is when you give structure to the experience of looking. This occurs when there are two or more points of reference in the artwork: horizontal distance, vertical distance, etc. Progressive rhythm is a repetition that gradually moves faster or slower across the surface of a work. Well, how does something that is still in visual move fast or slow? Well, often it depends on the distance between the repeated elements. For example, the lines on these steps. We'll end here on an architectural example of repetition from the Great Mosque at Cordoba, Spain, built between 784 and 786. You see how these arches and columns and the red stripes and the chandeliers create a rhythm? All right, I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about art and design, some of which you might have already known, especially if you've taken any art classes in the past. I look forward to hearing what you respond to in the art assignment.